What's up, everybody? Welcome to the seventh episode of The Third Divide. My guest today is Angela Clark. So, Angela, welcome. And let's start off this episode by asking which countries did you spend most of your childhood in?
Um, Most significantly Singapore, but I also grew up living between the US, the UK, and Italy.
Hmm. And that's because you have a mixed heritage, right?
That's right. My family lived in England and Italy, so that sort of secured going back there so often. Um, and then went to school in Singapore. So,
Did you feel more comfortable in in either one of those places?
so ultimately, I think Singapore was the place I felt most comfortable. When I was in elementary school, I was between American and British schools, and I really couldn't quite find my feet, although I desperately wanted to, couldn't quite find my feet culturally speaking, because they're quite, compared to Singapore, and particularly the school I went to, they're quite monocultural. So going to Singapore and being in a school, I went to an international school. So I was, for the first time, going to classes with kids who had as wild heritage as I had, and who were willing to embrace it. I think when I was in elementary school in particular, in England and in America, there was this need to be English or be American. Um, and it just never quite fit,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, but why do you think you felt that way in Singapore and not in the US and the UK?
Oh, well, in Singapore, I went to an international school. So I was with people like me who had come from, they were basically third culture kids as well. And I didn't look so different, because many of the other students also had parents from mixed cultures and mixed backgrounds.
Yeah. However, in the US and the UK, there are many schools like that. They're not necessarily international schools, but they do have some of the same elements,
True. This is
right?
true. And increasingly now, whereas when I was in elementary school, it was quite a while ago. And it also depends where you live. If you're more suburban, um, maybe it's a bit different. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, how did your experiences change your worldview?
I think it goes back to the monocultural versus multicultural environment, um, which is, closely linked to the nature versus nurture. Would I have realized on my own, had I grown up in more of a monocultural environment, um, to be as accepting and as sort of globally concerned? I don't think so. I think that was more a product of my environment and the school that I went to. Um, I went to a pretty unique school, although there, I think, 14 or 15 of them now. It was a United World College school,
Yeah.
and they're, I think, very well known for requiring all students to really participate in local community, international community, global concerns, global affairs, and just generally has like quite a well-rounded, I think, curriculum. I think it follows, most of the colleges follow the IB, and the school that I went to now goes from elementary all the way through IB, but at the time I was there, it was more middle school and high school.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, when I went to an international school, we had something called Culture Day, which,
Mm-hmm.
every it represented every nationality in the
Right.
school, both teachers and students. Did you have something like that?
Yes, we had UN night in November.
Really?
I still remember loving that because there was, I mean, it's mainly about the food.
Yeah, that
There
was
was,
my favorite thing about it too.
oh my goodness, just all the variety all in one place. But there'd also be a performance, a cultural performance. And it was mainly dance, but it was just a wonderful opportunity to see like the haka performed next to some ballet or some modern dance next to a the Balinese with their elaborate costumes and yeah, just really whatever polar opposite you can think of, they managed to put it together, and it was just really lovely. I miss those nights.
So after you got out of the like that global environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever feel a longing to it?
It took a while. I don't think I appreciated it as much when I was there, and I think I actually began by resenting it when I left, and I went back to America, and then I went back to England, and I just didn't. I found it very difficult to fit in at first, being just being coming from such an international community and going back into monocultural communities, or just more traditional communities, not even necessarily monocultural, but just having this umbrella of one way of doing things. I found it really difficult to fit in, particularly at first, and maybe even still now, actually. Yeah, I'm still the foreigner no matter where I live. So when I'm in England, most people assume that I'm American or Canadian. I get Canadian a lot. When I lived on the East Coast of America, people just assumed I was from England. And then on the West Coast of America, people assume that I'm Australian first, which is confusing, but I'm not offended. I'm happy to be an honorary Australian.
So you said that you resented the way like the place you lived in before to an extent, right?
Yeah, but part of that comes with age, doesn't it? Just sort of expectations going in versus reality in your early 20s. I think it changes. It's been a couple decades now. So I've had time to process and deal with it and think about what do I want for my kids, and how could I have done that differently, and how can I prepare my kids better.
Mm-hmm. And now that you think that you enjoy more of an international scene than a monocultural scene, do you feel more of an outsider in the United States than you did in Singapore?
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah. There's very little room in the place where I live, um, which is an anomaly for California. I live in a very affluent area. Yeah, difficult to explain.
So because you went to an international school and because you had the opportunity to interact with so many cultures, what kind of cross-cultural enrichment did you think you gained?
What cross-cultural enrichment didn't I gain, particularly from that environment of having like UN nights and a multicultural acceptance from the get-go, from like classroom level, um, being shoulder to shoulder with somebody who who well, maybe an Australian, and then somebody from Holland, and somebody from Denmark, and they're all sat at your table and you're all trying to figure out the same math problem or something. I think it really flattens the earth for you, makes things seem a lot closer. Whereas when I'm out here, I see that it's very difficult to hear international voices because there's so much local noise, particularly with the news outlets that we have over here. I can't really stand it. Can't really focus. I really depend on the things I learned about and depended on back then. So BBC World Service, and just looking up different magazines and publications that aren't at my immediate disposal here. I actually have to go looking for them.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. So like the news outlets over where you live, you're saying that they don't give you a voice. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I really don't feel that they speak for, I mean, America's quite a divisive place, so you can hear very clearly the bias on reporting in America in particular. So But maybe that's just because I've lived here now for 10 years. I hear it more than I hear it when I go back to England, for example.
Oh, okay, yeah. And when did you realize that you were a TCK?
I had a friend who was or is half Canadian, half South African, and she was the first one to mention it to me. And then I just started she recommended a book by Pico Iyer when I was in my 20s, and that was really helpful because it was like, oh yeah, that's me. Um, Somebody who's moved around a lot and doesn't really know where home is, and really struggles to put roots down. Even though I'm old enough to have my own family, it's very difficult to imagine where we'll be in 10 years' time. Um, really don't see myself staying where we are, but I guess equally could happen. It's confusing. It's a confusing thing to be.
Hmm. And when you started reading that book and then you realized, well, this describes me really well, was there any part that you didn't agree with about being a TCK?
You know, I honestly can't remember the details of that book in particular, but it helped connect me with other TCKs that I'd been to school with and continued to have a relationship with into adulthood. And then it certainly helps when I see that kind of keyword flagged. And the Facebook group where I saw your original post for the podcast
Hmm.
is something that regularly comes up in my feed. I think I read it fairly often. I'm not on Facebook that much, but when I'm on, I do certainly check in with the group and just see what's there. I find it very interesting how many open-ended questions there are on there. Like, I have this big life decision to make. Should I move to X country or Y country? And what do people think? Because I think TCKs in particular appreciate that there are going to be good things and bad things about everywhere you go. Nowhere is going to be perfect. And also sort of maybe knowing that you're never going to feel 100% happy with your choice because you grew up with so many choices, basically,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And do you feel that TCKs have it easier in a sense that wherever they move, they can just easily adapt to it because they've done it so many times before?
Yes and no. I think it takes, from my own experience, it takes a year to fully adapt to wherever you're living. On a very basic level, you need to figure out where to get food that you like, where to find the things that you need, the basic living things, like how to, where to catch the bus from, where to find the tube, where to, you just memorize your local map for the first year, I feel. I think it takes the brain that long. But as far as making friends, I think it just generally depends where you are, because I find in cities, there's a higher probability of finding more TCKs than in the suburbs,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
Hmm.
I'm sure there are exceptions to this rule, and I would love to hear of a suburb somewhere that is very child friendly, that is a TCK exclusive community. That would be very interesting.
It's also kind of a double-edged sword in a way because then a lot of TCKs just feel that they don't have much stability in life,
It is, isn't it?
especially when they're kids, right? Because
Yeah,
they don't really have a say in where their parents choose to go. Did that ever bother you at all?
absolutely. As I'm sure it bothered you.
A little.
Yes. Well, I mean, the fact is, we weren't really old enough to make those decisions, presumably. And we weren't in charge of all the information that they had. There's also a generational gap, I think, because my parents don't talk about it ever, but it must have been quite shocking for basically a white woman from the middle of sort of a very pastoral area of Italy, having a very Indian looking Englishman come to the front door and ask for her hand in marriage in the 70s. I think that was probably quite shocking to a lot of people. They don't talk about it. They don't really address it. So in a way, over the years, whenever I've thought about it, I've sort of slowly just forgiven them for more, because they must have come across racism at some point. They must have had difficulties here and there that either they didn't recognize or refuse to recognize. So it allowed me to be a bit more forgiving of their own choices. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Because
And
now it's less of an issue, isn't it? Again, dependent on where you are.
yeah, but generally speaking, it is kind of less of an issue.
Yes.
Uh,
They were really the pioneers. So I think we have to be a little bit understanding of that. And I think that's another part of being a TCK, because you're so used to putting yourself in other people's shoes. You see how everybody is the same all around the world, essentially. You all have the same basic needs and same emotional needs to a huge extent. So yeah, I think part of being a TCK also is becoming quite empathetic. Is that the word?
yeah. So looking back at it now, if you could go back and if you could choose to have, let's just call it like a normal life. You know, you live in one place your whole life, and
Yes.
then you move when you're old enough that you can.
Yes.
Instead of being a TCK, would you change it?
Ah, that's a question, isn't it? Would you?
There are definitely some things I would go back and tweak, but I don't think I would change the whole experience. Not like just minor tweaks of just, you know, not necessarily places that I've been, but you know, certain people that I've met, I guess.
Mm. I agree. It was difficult to reassimilate myself to socially in England and in America, because I had been well schooled in finding my social place in an international environment, and I do still find it very challenging. Um, yeah, it's a very tangled up question, because I feel like if you only live in one place, there's a very high likelihood that you just won't learn about the things we learned about being TCKs. Just wouldn't have been exposed to. So there's a good chance that we could have grown up to do exactly the same things that we're doing now. But of course, there's a higher chance that we wouldn't have.
Yeah, yeah. And like whenever I moved, I always looked forward to it and I couldn't wait to get out of my present place. And then when I end up moving, I just regret it. Did you ever feel that?
Yeah, the thrill of the fresh start, I think, is
Yeah,
very linked in with 21st century culture, our place in history, the fact that we no longer need to be in one place. We can, as COVID has proven recently, we can be anywhere and still do pretty much whatever we like, because the internet really has managed to see to a lot of needs that we would otherwise have had to leave the house to do before, to seek before.
yeah,
So I think that's always everybody's dream, TCK or no, to drop everything and start fresh. All the Instagram feeds and the social media feeds of the McMansions and all the things you can find on Amazon and stuff. It's very tempting to just start fresh all the time. But yeah, I think personally, I don't really, I think wherever you go, you still bring yourself with you. So more
mm,
important to figure out what it is that you think you're moving from or to before you go.
yeah.
But that's just my experience.
And speaking of the internet, do you think you still feel like, how do you stay connected to like all your friends and just your previous community? Like, do you feel a longing for it? I don't know, do you have a desire to go back and visit the places that you've lived in before?
Oh, absolutely. And we do try to all the time. Every year we've gone back to England and Italy to visit family and friends. Um, just the year before COVID is very telling of my age. I went to my 20-year high school reunion in Singapore, and I took my children and my husband. My husband had been there before for the 10-year reunion, and we just had a whale of a time, and it was so interesting to see how things had developed, because really in the last 10 years I hadn't been back at all.
Mhm.
So just seeing how much the country had grown, and how much things had changed, and how many things had really stayed the same, and then being in touch with people. I think Facebook has been absolutely wonderful for my sort of age people to keep in contact with each other. I think it's been responsible for me really keeping up with everyone I've known in all the different countries. I hear there first when my cousins are getting engaged in Italy, or my friends from England get new teaching jobs, or yeah, just all life events seem to be put on there, because so far, I'll just say to date, people have been very liberal with what information they're sharing on Facebook. I don't know that that will be the same in the future, but maybe as time goes on, you also keep in closest contact with the ones that most consistently feel like, no matter how long it's been since the last time you've spoken to them, it feels like no time has passed at all. You
Mhm.
know those kinds of friends, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
everyone has those. They're few and far between, but they're really the quality ones, aren't they? So maybe just to the other half of the argument would be, if keeping in contact with so many people from such a diverse space maybe didn't assist with my integration into more monocultural communities, because I was constantly aware of what other people were doing, and possibly comparing myself um, unrealistically, because TCKs come from everywhere, don't they? It's unusual to find a group of TCKs from the same background, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's a pretty unattainable comparison to be looking at, particularly in the social media sphere.
Hmm.
You're looking at very select photographs. You don't see what's behind the camera. You don't see what's below or to the side of the camera. So it's all very romanticized. So there are two sides to that argument. It keeps you in touch, but maybe not all for the best.
Yeah. And what are the main benefits that you've received from being a TCK and the main challenges?
Benefits are many. Knowing about so many different cultures, ways of doing things, ways of thinking, I think gives you a bit of an inkling as to how little you know, how much there is to learn. And I think that that really has helped um, foster a lifelong love of learning, to be cliche about it. I'm very particular about what my children are learning. I think it very much informed my decision to home educate my children. Um, so, and in home educating, I get to choose what their curriculum is, and global concerns feature greatly, even at their young age, as well as academic, pushing basic academic things, because I realized that many people who don't have an awareness of their possibilities, the possibilities that are available to them, usually coming from a more monocultural area, um, they can fall short of what they're capable of, and I'm hoping that won't happen to my kids.
Hmm. So for you, right now, where do you think your home is? Do you think it's just like where you are right now in the United States, or do you feel like you still feel kind of a connection to Singapore? And if you're ever like, would you ever consider moving back there and living there?
I think I would, for the sake of the absolutely gorgeous food, and um, for the um, for the ability to have my children go through a similar education system that I went through. But it's a bit unrealistic. My husband and I own our own company, and it's not quite at the level where they're asking entrepreneurs to come to Singapore. You need to be quite rather more successful than we are. Um, but I do feel very strong ties to England. It's where I went to university, and I went to a very traditional university. I went to Cambridge. So having that um, does really feel like, in a way, I'll always belong there.
Hmm.
They certainly have a great alumni reach as well, which helps me feel connected. And there's an alumni group in my area that is constantly sort of doing things. It's down in San Diego, which is a ways away from where I live, but it's nice to still be included all these years later, in a way that my American background has never really done. Out of sight, out of mind is very much how I feel about America and Americans. I say this in the most loving way. I married one, but yeah, I think it's yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Where is home is not an easy to answer question.
no, I know. It's just that a lot of TCKs feel that home is just something that is something that's not tangible
Yeah.
for them. It's very transparent. For most TCKs, they say that anywhere can be home. Really, it really doesn't matter.
It's true.
It doesn't matter if it's the place you were born in at all. It doesn't matter if if it's the place that your family's from, or most of your family's from.
Hmm.
You know, for them or for us, the concept of home is just it's very liquid.
It is very liquid. And on the group, on the Facebook group, I do often hear a tinge of sadness about it, because maybe it's just that forever out of reach thing that none of us can have. But I would go back to that question now, actually, and say there are plenty of times I've felt at home, but it's usually when I'm transitioning from one place to another, because that's a very familiar childhood feeling of the joy of not really knowing what to expect, and learning things fresh and meeting people for the first time, and wondering what opportunities you're going to find, tinged with the sadness of where you've just come from and having to say goodbye to things. But yeah, there certainly have been moments, particularly on trains or airplanes or in Heathrow Airport, where I've just felt so at home. Yeah, just really felt that feeling of I'm home.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I think there's a bit of sadness involved is because, you know, I don't know if this is true for a lot of people, but we often grow up seeing that, you know, that people like on TV, we see that people have their hometowns, they grow up there their whole lives, and then they go back, they go meet their friends, they have their family there. And that's not the case for us.
Yes, it's not the case for us, but that's also from a very narrowly unimaginative storytelling point of view, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's supposed to evoke these feelings of leaving home, although probably statistically very few people have that. In California in particular, um, property prices are astronomical. If you can afford to buy a place, it's unlikely that you'd be able to help your children to buy a place near you. So for many, I think it's just economically unsustainable, as has been proven in the last 2 years when people were more able to work from home. There's been a mass exodus, and out of the major cities, New York, London, anywhere really, because it's quite unusual, I think, nowadays. And I wonder if storytelling will have to evolve to meet that need, because I think it's probably at least 20 years out of date now.
Mm-hmm.
There's that idea too of the college experience, and I hear it all the time from young people who are thinking about their futures, and they want the college experience that they've seen in the movies. But if it ever existed, it certainly doesn't exist now, because of the consequences of living that movie lifestyle. Is incredibly expensive, and you end up with lifetime of indentured servitude paying it back. So I think that they're going forward. I do have hope that storytelling will be more creative and less old-fashioned. I think it's a very old-fashioned way of grabbing someone's attention, and finding that common thread. And then I think it's really time that people do things differently. I think I'm not alone in feeling like we're really on the cusp of things changing significantly, because of what's been going on, health-wise, politically. Loads of people being at home has probably forced loads of people to think, right, this hasn't worked for me so far, what's going to work for me in the future? So yeah, hopefully this will be a really revolutionary time in a way, for how people live and how people see themselves. And also generationally, there have been people who, our parents, probably your grandparents, had one job, and sort of retired with the gold watch. But more our generation, people frequently job hop. Is part of there's also the millennial stereotype. And that has nothing to do with being a TCK. That just has to do with the age that we live in, basically, don't you think?
Yeah, I can't even begin to describe how true that is. Well, Angela, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the interview. It was so nice to chat with somebody who gets it.